Behind me is a family-owned variety store that was hit overnight. Fortunately, no one inside the store at the time, but the owners wanted to wait until daylight to inspect the damage. They say most things of value were taken overnight. Other businesses were hit as well during the protests. The protest had started out as a peaceful rally in Marshall Park, and then the peaceful demonstrators, many of them went to a local church. Other protesters stayed behind, protesting in the streets, and a smaller group of them clashing with police. Now, all of these protests stem from the Tuesday police-involved shooting of Keith Lamont Scott. And what's emerged from this is two very different versions of reality. Some of the protesters claim that it was a white cop shooting a black man who was unarmed. Police, though, say that it was an African-American police officer who shot self-defense, that this was an armed man that was threatening officers. They say that there is dash cam video and police body cam video corroborates their story. Again, they are not going to release that video right now to the general public, but they are trying to have a viewing for family members of the man who have shot to grant their request. I have some still pictures now that I want to show you that were taken just outside this business where we are. This morning, Charlotte Mecklenburg police officers came to this business initially to ask questions to try to find out who was responsible. And then when they completed their investigation, they got out a broom. They began repairing the windows, the doors out in front. And if you come back to my live shot, you can see there are still two officers inside this business trying to help this family repair all the damage from last night. Jenna?
A big question about what's next. Jonathan, thank you very much. We're going to have much more on this story. One of our big stories of the day. Of course, the investigation is ongoing. And Greg Jarrett is with us today here on Happening Now. You were listening to the police chief with your law background. What do you make of this video not being released and kept, at least from the public for now?
Well, it may be a mistake because the police chief was questioned on numerous occasions during that news conference. Why don't you release the videotape as soon as possible to avoid and deter any further violence? Remember, there's a man lying in a hospital bed who was shot last night in critical condition. Had that videotape been released earlier in the day yesterday, all of that might have been avoided. Cameras don't generally lie unless they're altered in some form. Assuming this hasn't been, it might prove the police theory that this was a justified shooting. Remember, just having a firearm is not a crime. It's not a threat.
Are you concerned about that now, that perhaps that could be it, that it doesn't show enough to justify the shooting?
And that may be why the chief of police is reticent in putting forth this videotape, but the longer he does it, the greater the increase of more violence.
Well, that's interesting. So that's something we're going to watch for. At this time, we have no more information other than what the police have told us. So we're going to go on that and continue to watch the situation in Charlotte. In the meantime, we're going to have a former member of the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force join us in just a few minutes from now, talking a little bit about this story and other news we have today. Well, we're going to move on to politics now. Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump go head-to-head in just a few days. And the first presidential debate is something that's going to be watched very closely. Both nominees have been preparing for weeks. In fact, Hillary Clinton isn't campaigning today in order to prep. According to our next guest, Clinton will likely focus her efforts on persuading younger voters to back her instead of a third-party candidate, while Trump has to unify the Republican base, many of whom are still on the fence as to whether he's qualified. Perhaps not many, but certainly a segment. In the end, how much do the debates matter? According to Larry Sabato's crystal ball, quote, there has been at least one televised presidential debate every 4 years for 4 decades now. The streak began in 1976. Every 4 years, the debates seem very important. Whether they are or not is open to debate. Larry Sabato is director of the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia. I didn't add the ahem in there, Larry, for dramatic effect, but it is written in. So traditionally, you don't see debates as moving the needle at all?
Well, sometimes they move the needle, but often they move it only for a few days or a week or 10 days, and then it goes back, the campaign goes back to where it was, at least in the polls or the polling averages. Jen, I have to say one thing, though. the candidates always try to anticipate the questions and come up with a blockbuster answer. Well, I think everybody knows what one of the questions is going to be, maybe the first question. We see what's happening in Charlotte. We've seen what's happened now for many, many months. I'd be surprised if the moderator, Lester Holt, did not ask a question either at the top or early on about this particular subject. So the candidates kind of got a heads up here.
And the story is changing very quickly, so we'll see where we are indeed 4 days from now. There's a special burden, you say, on the moderators this year. What is that?
Well, the moderators are being pushed by many people to fact-check the candidates, which of course calls for a lot of knowledge on their part about many, many different subjects. It's also a dangerous terrain for them, because if they appear to be siding with one candidate or the other, let's just say they will get thousands and thousands of emails and tweets and letters and calls. And I rather think they would like to avoid that. On the other hand, there are people who advocate that moderators should minimize their role in the debate. They should let the candidates conduct the flow of the discussion, keeping obviously some kind of time count to make sure that both candidates have a reasonable chance to make their case.
Interesting. So we'll watch for how the moderators handle it, Lester Holt being the first one. You say that Clinton needs to persuade younger voters. She also needs to pull a few percentage points, you write, worth of anti-Trump Republicans. I'm curious about that second segment, the anti-Trump Republicans. Can Clinton win if she doesn't pull those Republicans over?
Well, she can. Obviously, she would like for there to be enough of an edge so that it brings in a Democratic Senate. If she does get elected president, her presidency is going to be much more difficult if both houses of Congress are controlled by Republicans. So I think that's part of the thinking. But, you know, look, there's been one survey out, Jenna, already suggesting that millennials are the least likely segment of the electorate to watch this debate, which disappoints me as a college professor. I'm trying to get all these young people to watch, and you know, there's something I've learned over the years about young people. They're always busy, Jenna.
They're
so much busier than all the rest of us are.
What are they doing, Larry? That's what we want to know. And that brings up the interesting. You're afraid to ask.
I'm afraid to know.
You know, then that brings up an interesting question about debates, about whether or not whether they matter, but whether they matter to the groups or the voters that the candidates really need. Just finishing up here on Donald Trump, one of the things that you say about Donald Trump, and you've said for the last several weeks, you know, we're in unprecedented territory. So you're not closing the door on a good debate performance for him, really pushing him ahead to a national lead?
Oh, sure. I mean, look, he is the television professional between those two candidates. He is more relaxed on TV. He's used to television. He's much more spontaneous than Clinton is. You know, Clinton sometimes is lawyer-in-chief, and that doesn't necessarily come across well in a debate. I think what she has to do is, you know, occasionally show some humor, show some personal sides of herself in her answers if she wants to connect with people instead of just make debating points.
We'll see what they end up doing. And as we've noticed and as we've seen over the last several days, news can change quickly. So we'll see what we're talking about by then. Larry, great to see you as always. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna.
Now, this Fox News alert as we await a news conference with Iran's President Hassan Rouhani. Several families are gathering in New York to pressure the Iranian government, including our next guest, after his wife, a charity worker, was reportedly sentenced to 5 years in prison in Iran. This on a spying charge after a secret trial. Her name is Nazanin, and she's a dual British-Iranian citizen. She was arrested at Tehran airport in April while trying to fly home from visiting her parents with her 2-year-old daughter. Police later confiscated that child's passport, and the child is still inside the country with the grandparents. Joining me now, Richard Ratcliffe, Nazanin's husband. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jenna, for having me.
We're looking forward to learning a little bit more about Nazanin. How did you two meet?
Yeah, so we met when she came over to study in the UK. She came over to do her master's, and we met early on through a mutual friend, went for a coffee, or for another coffee, and just really clicked.
Was it love at first sight?
It's like coming home, I think. You know, that kind of, you know, when you just feel at ease with someone.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that was lovely.
So did you ever travel to Iran with Nazanin in the past?
Yes. So obviously I went to present my credentials as a potential son-in-law, which was quite a stressful visit, and then went a second time to have a wedding there. And then the third visit was a bit more relaxed. and we went last year for her sister's wedding.
So she's traveled back and forth between the two countries
She's been
quite
back
a fair bit.
many more times. So she's been back probably twice a year since Gabriella was born, our daughter, just to sort of show off her baby and you know, to her mum and her grandparents and so on.
As a mom, I can understand that. You want the whole family to meet your child. Walk us through exactly what happened to her during this last trip.
So this last trip, so she went and it was Easter, which is also Iranian New Year, and at the end of it, on the way back, she was checking in at the airport and got stopped and was told there was a passport problem, and taken off into a small room, and she was obviously with Gabriella, and all the documents were taken, so that her passport, Gabriella's passport, all their phones, and she was told to give Gabriella back to her mother, who was there to see her off.
Has anything like that ever happened before?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, certainly not to us, and there have been no problems ever on, because in Iran sometimes people get taken for questioning, but no, that's never happened to us. It's not political, so there's no reason.
And on the fact that you say she's not political, we're describing her as a charity worker. What sort of work has she done in the past? What is she doing?
So she's a project manager for an organisation called Thomson Reuters Foundation, which is the charity connected to Reuters, the news organisation. So what they do is sort of journalism training, and she doesn't do the training. She'd be the sort of the manager of the project. It will be a mixture of training kids to become journalists, and they'll also do working with sort of public bodies and improving their reach with journalists.
Iran is notoriously tight when it comes to the press, and any sort of free press operating within the country. Was she doing any charity work inside Iran?
She wasn't doing anything there, wasn't trying to do anything there. I think you know, actually also they're quite tight with charities as well, and so the idea of charity work, it's suspicious for them.
So how did it go from we're going to take your passports, you're at the airport, return your daughter to the grandparents, to you're going to be in prison for 5 years?
Well, so she disappeared for 2 days, didn't know where she was at all. 3 days, then she was allowed.
You had no contact
No
with her?
contact at all. She was allowed to call her family to say she was alive, and then she was allowed to call them the following day to say she was going to be released. And then she disappeared again. And it transpired that she'd been moved down to Kerman, which is a town about 1,000 kilometres away from Tehran, which is where the airport was. And we didn't hear anything for a long time who'd got her. We never heard why they got her. It was said it was national security charges. I mean, she was kept down in solitary confinement and being interrogated in that way they do, where they blindfold you and interrogate you from behind. And it was only after I went public to campaign that she was able to have a family visit. So after 38 days, she had her first family visit.
And what have you heard from her?
Well, so in that visit, she was very, very weak, so she couldn't stand up, and she had to have Gabriella lifted onto her lap to be able to play with her. And what came back, because all the phones obviously tapped and listened to, was just that she was okay and it was all fine. It was only later on that she was allowed to call me. She's been allowed to call me 3 times in 6 months. And then when she was allowed to explain that you know, what she was going through.
You know, we've covered the plight of Americans that have been imprisoned in Iran, and a big story in our country is a payment that was made on the same day that these Americans were released. Some are calling it ransom, our government doesn't. But I'm curious, for somebody on the outside who has a very personal connection to someone on the inside of Iran, how concerned you are about the same sort of thing needed to free Nazanin, or what sort of precedent that sets?
I think there's definitely a wave of people having been taken in the last 6 months, sort of once a month, a foreigner. So an Iranian with a foreign passport has been taken, and they said it's a dual national, and you can't, it's Iranian, so it's Iranian law. And I mean, in Nazanin's case, so she was sentenced to 5 years the day after the British embassy upgraded to a full embassy status. So that's very political in what they're doing, and there's obviously some political solution they're looking for. What that is, I don't know. At different times, messages have come to the family to say, if the British government reaches an agreement, then we'll let her go. But
and does that agreement mean money?
I have no idea what that means. Like, I've genuinely no idea what that means.
What are you doing to try to get her out?
So there's obviously a legal process that she was sentenced. There's an appeal that will happen, and that's handled obviously by my father-in-law and the lawyer there. Why I'm here in New York is with other families, just trying to raise our case. Mixture of two things: trying to get a meeting with the Iranian delegation. We've never been able to meet with the Iranian embassy in London, but to maybe meet with President Rouhani while he's here, or one of his team. Also to meet with other delegations of other countries that are having a similar problem, and to meet with different sort of families. I met with some of the American families here.
And we understand there's also a petition. We're going to make sure to put that information available to our viewers. How's your daughter doing?
Yeah, she's young enough she doesn't understand, so she lives in the moment. She's clearly much happier on the days she gets to see mummy.
From one mother to another, I can't imagine what it's like to be separated from her child. So we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming in. It's great to learn a little bit more about Nazanin, and we'll keep our viewers updated. We'll be right back with more happening now. We have breaking news potentially out of Pittsburgh. Donald Trump weighing in on the news of the day. Let's listen in.
So that's good. And I just heard from Rocky Bleier. He endorsed me. I said, can I say that? I said, I love tough people. And he's a tough cookie, and he just endorsed us. We have great relationships, and you know, it's really been something. We've had some great poll numbers come out just today. Rasmussen is 5 up nationwide. And I guess you probably saw Ohio is doing great. We're 4 or 5 up. The Fox poll came out last night and doing great. Pretty much we're doing great where we have to do great. Florida's been terrific. And I think we're going to have a big, big victory right here in the state of Pennsylvania. And I think it's going to be a big victory. I went to school here. My children went to school here. So it's a very, very special place to me. I also want to thank the Marcellus Shale Coalition and Ohio Oil and Gas Association and the West Virginia. Oh, that West Virginia. What a victory I had there. It was almost like running unopposed. All of the folks in West Virginia, they have been so great. They have been great. Right from day one. And now it helped when Hillary made the statement, I'm going to put all those mines and miners out of business. That was not a good statement to make. Maybe she knows something I don't know. But your organizations represent tens of thousands of jobs for hardworking Americans. Let me also recognize a really good friend of mine, an amazing guy, Harold Hamm. Where's Harold? He's here someplace. There he is. What a great guy. I spent a half an hour with Harold and dozens of hours. I mean, I spent so much time with all of these different folks, but I learned more in a half an hour with Harold Hamm than I made with all of the consultants put together. That I can tell you. But they tell me that a Republican can't carry the state of Pennsylvania. Wait till you see what happens here. Wait till you see. And I don't believe it, and you don't believe it. And I think you're going to have yourself not only a victory, but a really big one. That's going to go a long way to tell you what a wonderful industry you're in. And I have to say, do whatever you can to get out the vote November 8th. Do whatever you can, because a lot of things are happening, a lot of forces are happening, whatever you can. So it's great to be in Pittsburgh, the Steel City. I have a lot of friends here. Under a Trump administration, we're going to bring back our steel jobs, and we're going to rebuild this nation, so importantly. Before going any further today, I want to address the turmoil unfolding right now in our country. And it seems to be a never-ending problem. America desperately needs unity, and it needs the spirit of togetherness that has not really only got us through our toughest times, and we've had some tough times, but which has lifted us up in the past to our greatest achievements as a nation. Every day I see people of different backgrounds working together for a common good, and we need to bring that spirit to every part of our country and become one American nation, united by shared values and principles as American citizens. We have to do it. And we have to respect our flag. We have to respect our flag. We all have to walk a mile in someone else's shoes, see things through their eyes, and then get to work fixing our very wounded country. I mean, we have some real problems, and we do have a wounded country. Many Americans are watching the unrest in Charlotte unfolding right before their eyes on the TV screens. Others are witnessing the chaos and the violence firsthand. Our country looks bad to the world, especially when we are supposed to be the world's leader. How can we lead when we can't even control our own cities? We honor and recognize the right of all Americans to peacefully assemble, protest, and demonstrate. But there is no right to engage in violent disruption or to threaten the public safety and peace of others. Every single American in our country is entitled to live in a safe community. The violence against our citizens and our law enforcement must be brought to a very rapid end. The people who will suffer the most as a result of these riots are law-abiding African-American residents who live in these communities where the crime is so rampant. It's their jobs, housing markets, schools, economic conditions that will suffer. And the first duty of government is to protect their well-being and safety. We have to do that. There is no compassion in tolerating lawless conduct. Crime and violence is an attack on the poor and will never be accepted in a Trump administration. Never, ever. Our job, thank you. Our job is not to make life more comfortable for the violent disruptor, but to make life more comfortable for the African American parent trying to raise their kids in peace, to walk their children to school, and to get their children great educations. We have to cherish and protect those people. For every one violent protester, there are thousands of moms and dads and kids in that same community who just want to be able to really to sleep safely at night, to be able to walk on the streets, to be able to go to the grocery store. More law enforcement, more community engagement, more effective policing is what our country needs, and we need it quickly. Last year, we saw a 17% rise in violent crime in our 50 largest cities. Homicides are up nearly 50% in Washington, D.C., and more than 60% in Baltimore. More than 3,000 people have been shot in Chicago so far this year from January 1st. Can you believe that? Nationwide, approximately 60% of murder victims under the age of 22 are African American. This is a national crisis, and it's the job of the next president of the United States to work with our governors and mayors to address this crisis and save African American lives. Look at the example that we had in New York of Mayor Rudy Giuliani, who's been a tremendous person for me, a friend of mine for a long time, and a big endorser, big endorser. The policies he put into place ultimately brought down crime by 76% and murder in New York by 84%. Think of how many families these policies saved from the worst heartache imaginable. We need a national anti-crime agenda to make our cities safe again. We have to make our cities safe again. We will appoint the best prosecutors, investigators, and federal law enforcement officers in the country to dismantle the international cartels, gangs, and criminal syndicates. And I will stop the drugs from flowing into our country and poisoning our youth and many other people. And if you're not aware, drugs are a very, very big factor in what you're watching on television at night. My administration will work with local communities and local officials to make the reduction of crime a top priority. Safety is the foundation of the ladder to American success. A great education and a really good paying job. We've lost so many of our good jobs to other countries. We're going to be bringing them back right here to Pittsburgh, to Pennsylvania. We're going to be bringing them back to Ohio. We're going to be bringing them back all over the country. They're coming back. They're coming back. These trade deals and the people, I think we'll have to have Harold Hamm negotiate a couple of trade deals for us, folks. To have the best schools and the best jobs, you must have safe communities. That means we must recognize the contributions of our police, who come from all backgrounds and all walks of life, and who often thanklessly risk their own lives to protect innocent people, many of whom they've never met. We all remember earlier this year when officers in Dallas, hunted down for execution, continued protecting the public until their last moments on earth. They were killed. Every day, police officers risk their lives for really complete strangers, and in every year, many of them will go out on calls and never return. It's tough being a police officer. And it's hard now even recruiting police officers. It's a tremendous problem. Police are entrusted with immense responsibility, and we must do everything we can to ensure that they are properly trained, that they respect all members of the public, and that any wrongdoing is always, and it will be by them, vigorously addressed. Has to be. But our men and women in blue, and you know this, the men and women in blue need your support. They need your thanks, and they need your gratitude. They are the line separating civilians and civilization from total chaos. They are also the front lines of defense in the war on terror, as we saw recently with their quick action following the terrorist attacks in New Jersey and New York, and the off-duty police officers. I mean, you saw the heroics of the off-duty police officers in Minnesota. An amazing job they did, catching this horrible person so quickly. With how do you do that? They figured it out. And within a short period of time, they were able to capture him. I mean, who could do that? That's tougher than finding oil, I will tell you. Right? In addition to providing safety, we must provide economic opportunity, and that begins with school choice and leads to a secure job with a rising income. This brings us to the subject of energy. Producing more American energy is a central part of my plan to making America wealthy again, especially for the poorest Americans. I knew I'd have to make that statement in order to get you guys a little bit enlivened. Well, you'll like the rest of what I'm going to say even more. America is sitting on a treasure trove of untapped energy. Some $50 trillion in shale energy, oil reserves, and natural gas on federal lands, in addition to hundreds of years of coal energy reserves. It's all upside for this country. More jobs, more revenues, more wealth, higher wages, and lower energy prices. I'm going to lift the restrictions on American energy and allow this wealth to pour into our communities, including right here in the state of Pennsylvania that we love. According to the Institute for Energy Research, lifting the restrictions on American energy, including shale production, will accomplish the following. Increase GDP by more than $100 billion each year. That's good music. Add over
Donald Trump speaking on a wide range of issues, as he has done over the last several days, talking a little bit about
upstanding. You can stop somebody if you have suspicion. Police were stopping people without any given suspicion. Randomly. Okay, so it was abused here. Something like that in Chicago would be very helpful. It would be a great tool for the police if used properly.
Ebony?
Yeah, I think I want to get rid of this narrative that we no longer have stop and frisk. As you said, Richard, Terry v. Ohio is standing law. It is still a Supreme Court doctrine that officers do implement. They just must do it correctly. You cannot arbitrarily stop someone and frisk them for no articulable, reasonable suspicion. Right. And all the courts were saying was that you must state that in order to effectively do stop and frisk. And it's a very valuable tool when it's used properly. Of course it is.
According to the FBI, crime in major cities across America has actually dropped. Chicago seems to be the exception.
Correct. No, it certainly is true. Violent crime has dropped over 20 years in this country. However, in Chicago, you have 3,000 shootings, 500 murders to date, and it's not even the largest city in America. There is a problem there. There is an epidemic there that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, almost, we were talking about it while Trump was speaking. You almost need to declare the equivalent of martial law in Chicago.
Absolutely. It needs to almost become a police state because, you know, we all have people, I'm sure we know, that are from Chicago, live in Chicago communities. I was talking over brunch. What is going on there? It's chaos, and it absolutely must be addressed for the greater good.
One of the remarkable stats about Chicago is the recidivism rate. People get arrested, they get prosecuted, and then they almost immediately get let out and commit the same crimes again. Is that one of the fundamental flaws that afflict Chicago?
No, absolutely. Look, criminals are going to be criminals unless they're, rehabilitated.
Right.
And so there's no programs to rehabilitate. If you're not locking up career criminals for long periods of time, you're going to have those issues because they're going to go back to the same neighborhoods and do the same thing they did before.
And guns off the street. You know, in a lot of major cities, there are some very aggressive gun removal programs that take place on a regular basis. Not so in Chicago.
Yeah, and that's one of the chief criticisms, right? When you go on and you want to talk about gun control and gun reform, it's, look, criminals are still going to get guns. We're not concerned with law abiding. And you're right, Greg. They have got to implement these programs in a serious way, be serious about rehabilitation, and also not use these excuses of clogged dockets and clogged prison systems to let out really violent people.
And the other problem is rampant drugs, which breeds the violence with guns.
Sure, and when we talk about drugs, that's all economics, right? People have jobs. They're not going to hopefully sell drugs or take jobs because they're going to have something to stand for. And so the economic issues, the social issues are also a problem in Chicago in addition to the crime.
And education, too. Do we all remember how school did not even start for weeks and weeks and weeks? And Rahm Emanuel, and that's the cute.
Were the topics hit by Donald Trump today in his speech. Ebony Williams, Richard St. Paul, good to see you both. Thank you for being with us. We're going to pause, take a quick break, and be right back.
And we start with politics. We begin with new numbers and new momentum for Donald Trump as he and Hillary Clinton prepare for the first presidential debate on Monday night. Welcome to the second hour of Happening Now, everybody. I'm Jenna Lee.
And I'm Greg Jarrett in for John Scott. Hillary Clinton is off the campaign trail today. She's preparing for the upcoming debate. Donald Trump is in the battleground state of Pennsylvania, where he addressed the news of the day, specifically the deadly police shooting that sparked violent rioting among protesters in Charlotte.
We must recognize the contributions of our police, who come from all backgrounds and all walks of life, and who often thanklessly risk their own lives to protect innocent people, many of whom they've never met.
But the main focus of Trump's speech was on energy policy and how his plan would utilize all kinds of energy to create jobs and lower costs for all Americans.
America is sitting on a treasure trove of untapped energy. It's all upside for this country. More jobs, more revenues, more wealth, higher wages, and lower energy prices.
Well, this is brand new national polling from NBC and the Wall Street Journal show Hillary Clinton with a 6-point lead over Trump. But take a look at this. New Fox polls put Trump on top in 3 critical battleground states, Nevada, North Carolina, and Ohio. Our Chris Wallace anchors Fox News Sunday. He will also moderate the third and final presidential debate. So, Chris, some new numbers today. You have the national polling, of course, that shows Clinton up by 6 points, but you see Donald Trump making some moves in battleground states. What's the big picture looking across all these new numbers?
Well, I think the big picture is kind of a mixed picture, Jenna, and that is it's good news for Trump to the degree that he's leading in those 3 states. And even though he's still down 6 in the Wall Street Journal poll, that's closer. But even if he were to win those 3 states that you just showed, it wouldn't be enough. And that's Trump's problem, is that he has a very narrow path to get to the 270 electoral votes. Even if he wins all those states, even if he wins Florida, it's still not enough. And there's some other polls that are out today that show that Virginia, which is traditionally, or at least in recent elections, been a swing state, he's now down by almost double digits. Colorado, the same. So his path to getting to 270, even if he wins all these states that he's up in slightly now, he's still got to turn around some other states, like, for instance, Pennsylvania, which he's been down by almost double digits. So he needs, in the Wall Street Journal article, they said he still needs a game changer. And obviously one of the possibilities there is this first debate on Monday night.
Let's talk a little bit about the strategy ahead of that debate. We heard from Larry Sabato last hour in Happening Now. He said debates commonly do not move the needle when it comes to voters, but anything's possible because we're in this unprecedented election season. You see Hillary Clinton off the trail she's preparing for the debate. You see Donald Trump speaking very often, multiple times a day. He's getting national press for us. Talk us talk us through those two strategies and what you're seeing from both candidates now.
Well, Clinton is taking the traditional, I don't know that it's strategy, but the traditional approach to preparation, which is to really closet yourself, to sit down with top advisors. We understand that there is somebody, and I'm amazed that this hasn't leaked yet, who is playing Donald Trump. You go over questions, people critique it. The person presents all kinds of Donald Trumps, a softer, gentler Trump, and also a very aggressive Trump, and she tries to deal with all of them. Trump is taking, as you would expect for an unconventional candidate, an unconventional approach, not getting off the campaign trail, supposedly not having full mock debates with somebody playing Hillary Clinton. He didn't do a lot of preparation during the primaries, and it worked fine for him. But a presidential debate when it's just two people on the stage, there's nobody else there, and if you're not talking, your opponent is talking, there's no place to hide there. It's going to be tough.
Who do you think is playing Donald Trump? Do you have any guesses, Chris, as far as who's playing Donald Trump with Hillary Clinton?
There's been a couple of names suggested. Mark Cuban, the billionaire businessman, has been suggested. N. Rendell, the former governor of Pennsylvania. You would think they would want somebody with a big, strong personality, because whatever Donald Trump shows up on Monday, it's going to be that Donald Trump. He'll have that same ability to kind of take a lot of the oxygen out of the room. So it's going to have to be somebody pretty big, both physically and also in personality.
He has consistently been a big personality on all the debates, regardless of the different styles that he may have. Real Clear Politics says this about the debate, saying that the number of undecided voters is larger than usual, as well as third-party voters. And so I wonder how we take that into consideration, Chris, also looking at the poll numbers, whether or not those two larger than usual groups are really represented in the numbers.
Well, yeah, I think that to a certain degree that this debate, or if I was going to say who has an easier task on Monday, I would say Donald Trump, because a lot of the issues with Hillary Clinton in the Wall Street Journal poll were about her policies, what she did as Secretary of State in the situation in the Middle East, what she did on the emails. You can't really change that. You can try to explain it, but you can't really change that. A lot of the doubts about Donald Trump are temperament, and if he shows a temperament that voters like, he can answer a lot of those doubts. So I'm not saying he's going to succeed. I'm just saying that I think, excuse me, I think he has a kind of easier path to, quote, success in a first debate. Whether that's enough to turn the numbers around, we'll have to wait and see.
And of course, we'll see if the news changes between now and then. Last week at this time,
we can be sure.
Right.
We can be sure it will. It keeps changing every day these days.
You know, last week at this time, we weren't expecting any sort of terrorist attack. We weren't expecting necessarily what happened in Charlotte. So a lot to definitely take into consideration over the next few days and see how that plays into the debates. Chris, it's great to see you. I know you have a busy Fox News Sunday as well coming up. Thank you very much. Don't miss Fox News Sunday this weekend. Chris Wallace talks with Republican Vice Presidential nominee, Indiana Governor Mike Pence. Sunday, 2 p.m. Eastern, right here on the Fox News Channel. Check your local listings for the Fox Channel in your area. Greg?
Let's go to Josh Earnest live at the White House now, who may have some reaction to this.
And it also makes our community safer, which is ultimately everybody's goal.
Okay. I anticipate there will be quite a few questions on that topic.
Okay.
I wanted to ask about Bashar al-Assad accusing the U.S. of intentionally attacking the Syrian military, saying that multiple planes were involved in what he described as a lengthy attack. I just wanted to get the White House reaction to his comments.
Well, I think that we've already addressed publicly that over the weekend there was an incident that is under investigation by the Department of...
Ernest, some very brief comments, but now has moved on to another subject, in particular Syria, so we'll continue to monitor his remarks live at the White House press briefing room.
Some Syrian government forces.
Now this Fox News alert on the bombings in New York and New Jersey. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill preparing for a briefing by intelligence officials on the investigation, as authorities ask for the public's help tracking down these two men. Surveillance video shows them removing the pressure cooker bomb that did not explode on Saturday night from a piece of luggage in the Chelsea neighborhood of Manhattan. Ahmed Rahami, the suspect in the bombings, remains hospitalized with gunshot wounds following the shootout in Linden, New Jersey that you watched on our program. Brian Yanis is live in Chelsea with more. Brian?
Hi, Jenna. Well, the FBI is waiting by Ahmad Rahami's hospital bed, waiting for him to speak because he's been unconscious and unable to speak while he recovers from his gunshot wounds that he received in that police shootout that injured 2 police officers. Meantime, Fox News has learned that his wife, Asia Bimi Rahami, landed last night in the United States on a flight from the United Emirates. She visited Pakistan in June. She's said to be cooperating with authorities. She's not considered a suspect. We also have new surveillance videos showing people running for their lives when the bomb went off in Lower Manhattan Saturday night. This, as the NYPD Deputy Commissioner John Miller says, the investigation into whether he had help is ongoing.
We're open to any possibility that he acted alone, that there were others involved, that he could have been inspired by a group, enabled by a group, directed by a group, but we're just not there yet.
A bloody handwritten journal Rahami carried while he was wounded in a police shootout has references to Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS. There are also questions about Rahami's family as authorities find out whether they knew about the 28-year-old's alleged bombing plot. Investigators found a video on a relative's cell phone showing Rahami laughing while testing an incendiary device in the family's backyard just 2 days before the bombings. The father says he had no idea his son was planning an attack. Authorities are looking for 2 unknown men, by the way. These men took the second pressure cooker out of the luggage, left it, and then proceeded to take the luggage. The police say they are not suspects. They simply want to speak with them and also get that bag back for evidence. Also, by the way, they're very lucky that explosive did not blow up. Jenna?
Brian, thank you.
Lawmakers questioning immigration officials at a hearing in the wake of that bombshell report that hundreds of illegal immigrants were granted citizenship instead of being deported. New information on a key issue in this election, immigration. It is the topic of a very important hearing on Capitol Hill today. In the wake of that bombshell report that revealed hundreds of immigrants who should have been deported were instead granted citizenship by mistake. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen joins us live with more. James?
Greg, good afternoon. Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee painted a bleak picture of a broken immigration system with tens of thousands of illegal aliens with criminal convictions being released each fiscal year. But the director of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, Sara Saldana, told lawmakers this morning agencies' hands are often tied by court rulings, manpower shortages, or other bureaucratic factors that prevent such individuals from being held. The director's testimony came 2 days after that internal audit at the Department of Homeland Security that found another agency, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, or CIS, improperly granted citizenship to 1,029 foreigners from countries of concern or with high rates of immigration fraud. These are individuals who had already had a final deportation order issued against them under another identity. Saldana said her agency is working on rectifying the problems that led to those releases, including updating fingerprint inventories. Now, also up for discussion today, sanctuary cities, including many major metropolitan jurisdictions that don't enforce federal immigration laws. Saldana told the lawmakers that she approaches her job from the point of view of having herself been a former federal prosecutor, the U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Texas.
As a former prosecutor, I'm just wondering how you can continue to square the existence of sanctuary cities with the duty of a prosecutor to ensure justice.
These cities that you're talking about, sir, have their own laws. Either the state passes them or there's a local ordinance for which I have no control. All I can do is to use my best persuasive powers to work with them.
Saldana also said as many as 40,000 Haitian immigrants are believed to be heading from Brazil to the California border with Mexico as DHS announces it is revoking the protection from deportation that Haitians have enjoyed here following the devastating earthquake in their country in 2010, Greg.
James Rosen live in Washington. James, thanks.
You bet.
Well, the Iranian president and the Israeli prime minister speaking just hours apart at the UN General Assembly. What the rivals had to say about their hopes for progress in the Middle East as a leader of the Jewish state just praised its biggest ally.
With the nuclear constraints on Iran 1 year closer to being removed, let me be clear. Israel will not allow the terrorist regime in Iran to develop nuclear weapons. Not now, not in a decade, not ever.
That was just moments ago. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressing the UN General Assembly, not wavering at all on Iran. We have a whole bunch of issues to talk about. Let's bring in Ambassador Nancy Soderberg, former U.S. ambassador to the UN and former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Ambassador Adam Early, former State Department spokesperson and former U.S. ambassador to Bahrain. Great to have you both. It's interesting listening to Netanyahu yet again this year to make note that this is the first time we're hearing from world leaders after the nuclear deal with Iran has been implemented. And one of the big questions, Ambassador Soderberg, is this: what's changed?
Well, a lot has changed. Iran has been stopped in the tracks of its nuclear weapon on all paths that it currently has, so the world is a lot safer, and Israel is safer. Now, we don't trust, and we will verify, sanctions will snap back if they cheat. But if you listen to the Iranian speech, it was vastly different. No longer death to America, but talking about a new era, a constructive dialogue. It's night and day, and Israel is safer for it. Ambassador Early, do you agree?
I think that the nuclear agreement succeeded insofar as it aimed to, but it's a very limited success. Look, what we've done is we've kicked the can down the road. Iran has stopped its enrichment program, but it's going to resume as soon as this agreement expires. But more importantly, their troublesome behavior in the region and their aggressive posture towards the U.S. allies has not. In fact, it's only intensified. So my concern is they've pocketed the concessions we've made and have not altered their behavior in a whole variety of fields that causes us, or that should cause us, great concern.
Ambassador Soderberg, one of the reasons that folks may have concerns are, for example, the way that Iranian ships have harassed our ships in the Strait of Hormuz, or the fact that Americans have been taken and imprisoned in Iran yet again. We spoke to a husband of a British dual citizen that is in prison in Iran right now today. And so one wonders about Iranians' actions, not necessarily their words. And I'm curious about what Rouhani, the president of Iran, wants from the United States now, which is to really lessen some of the banking restrictions on his country so that they can fully engage in business, international business. Do you think that's something that the United States should do now, all things considered?
No, I don't. I mean, there are still a variety of sanctions on Iran, and rightly so. We don't have to guess what Iran is doing. We know what Iran is doing. It's supporting terrorism in Hezbollah and Hamas, supporting the regime of Assad, which is committing terror throughout the region. It is still a threat to the United States, and that's why we still have sanctions on. But it is less of a threat without a nuclear weapon. It's not just buying time. We have blocked that path. They may cheat in the future, and that's why we're on top of it. But we will not lift sanctions until their behavior changes. Their behavior did change on the Iranian nuclear program, and that's why we have had some sanctions lifted. The rest will be lifted when their behavior changes, and no one is holding their breath on that step.
So what would that change look like, Ambassador Early, for someone like you who's a little bit more cautious about engaging with Iran?
Well, I just think that what a change accepted the United States would look like would be, look, they've tested, despite the agreement, they've new tests of ballistic missiles, which have been in violation of UN sanctions. The UN didn't do anything about it because we didn't push it. Their other changes would be to stop supporting surrogates in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, and trying to overthrow friendly regimes in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf that the United States relies on for its security. But that's a pipe dream, frankly, if you judge by what Iran does and what Iranians say, Hassan Rouhani's comments notwithstanding.
There's two different schools of thoughts about the way we should behave when it comes to diplomacy with Iran. Now that there's some communication, obviously, between our two countries. Ambassador Soderberg, do you think we're close to opening an embassy inside Tehran?
No, I don't.
Do you think we'll be in our lifetime?
We are a long way from that. This is a regime that represses democracy, represses human rights, has political prisoners. is a theocracy behind the power. It's not a democracy. If you look what happened in 2009 when you had young demonstrators shot on the streets and those movements squashed, they will reemerge. This is not over. We're going to see a reemergence of a democratic push. How the regime reacts will determine how we react. Right now, I'm not confident at all that they will let democracy happen. It's a very slow, long process, but the regime that has been in tight control, they're getting old and the youth is coming up. Iran is driven by the youth. And so we're trying to reach out to them and show there is a different path. How long that takes, my guess is it's a decade or two, maybe a generation. And the United States is not going to overreact to that. We're going to not trust and verify the Iranian actions. But the world is safer today with that nuclear agreement in place. Israel is safer, and there's no doubt about that. It may not work in the long run, but it's helping to ease tensions in the region at a very volatile time. And I'll just add one point. We need Iran to help in Syria, and these kinds of releasing of one tension can help in others. We'll wait and see and verify if that does.
I'm going to have to run, but Ambassador Ehrlich, your final thoughts on that?
Well, I completely agree with Ambassador Soderberg. Change in Iran is going to be gradual. It's not going to be sudden. I would not expect them to be helpful in Syria. I think U.S. diplomacy is a combination of carrots and sticks. And over the near term, we need to be less appeasing towards Iran and I think a little bit more of the stick.
We'll see what happens from here. Thank you both for joining us today. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Fox News alert on the political fallout now from the deadly police shooting that triggered 2 nights of riots in Charlotte. Both presidential nominees addressing the violence, with Donald Trump calling for a national expansion of a controversial police tactic.
Obviously, you can't let the system go the way it's going, but I suggested stop and frisk. And some people think that's a great idea, and some people probably don't like it. But when you have 3,000 people shot and so many people dying, I mean, it's worse than some of the places we're hearing about, like Afghanistan, you know, the war-torn nations. I mean, it's more dangerous.
So stop and frisk, he advocates. Hillary Clinton addressing the issue differently.
We have 2 more names to add to a list of African Americans killed by police officers in these encounters. It's unbearable, and it needs to become intolerable.
Joining us now to talk about Ford O'Connell, GOP strategist, adjunct professor at the GW Graduate School of Political Management. And Leslie Marshall joins us, Fox News contributor and syndicated radio talk show host. Good to see you both. Leslie,
you too,
is Donald Trump unaware of the fact that a federal judge determined that stop and frisk was unconstitutional and thereafter New York abandoned it? Moreover, a large-scale study by New York University found it had no effect on crime.
Well, you read my mind. In addition to the judge finding it unconstitutional, it was unconstitutional on the grounds that it targeted minorities disproportionately. And in addition, in New York, that he likes to cite, his city, a crime actually went down after they stopped this stop and frisk. And also, Greg, if you're trying to mend the problem, the racial tension, lack of respect and trust between officers and the African American community specifically, you don't increase racial profiling, which obviously is an issue and a concern and a complaint within that community.
All right, so Ford...
Wait a minute, Greg, I got to ask you a question. There's a nonsense factor going on here. Stop and frisk was not deemed unconstitutional. What
yes,
was
it was by Judge Shira Scheindlin.
You went to Cal Hastings Law School, and I'm a lawyer as well.
Come on, Ford, don't pull that.
No, I'm just making the point. How it was implemented in New York was unconstitutional because it's an outgrowth of a Terry stop, okay? And a Terry stop is not deemed unconstitutional. Just making that one point, Greg.
All right, then let me go to Hillary Clinton now, to be fair. She said it's unbearable and needs to stop, referring in part to the Charlotte shooting. Well, Ford, what if it turns out it was justified, as the chief of police says it is, and that the videotape will prove it?
Well, that's exactly right. I think it's absolutely irresponsible to speculate on what happened here because we don't know without the facts. But you have to understand Hillary Clinton's position. She's worried about turnout among the African-American community, so she's going to lump the two shootings together no matter what the actual facts is because she's having a hard time putting back together the Obama coalition. On Trump's side, he's talking about stop and frisk because affluent suburban voters are concerned about the safety of their communities.
You know, Leslie, Hillary Clinton also said that we need to address systemic racism and implicit bias in police forces, referring again to Charlotte. Does she not realize that the officer who fired the fatal shot was himself black?
No, she does, but that is not the situation.
Well, then is she saying that black officers are targeting black citizens who are innocent?
No, I don't think she was saying that at all. I think that even when Donald Trump, talked about he looked like a good guy, a good person with regard to the shooting in Tulsa, even when we hear what officers said from helicopters and things, I think this is the perception. Look, I said this yesterday on my radio show. I'm a white woman, and if I'm sitting in my car and it's broken down, whether I'm reading a book or I'm waiting for AAA, I can almost guarantee a police officer is not going to come over, knock on my window, and ask what I'm doing there. I'm not so sure the same can be said for an African-American male.
Yeah.
And that's not my opinion. Well, that when we look at how many people are stopped, and we have had federal investigations, and we have seen what police departments are looking at now.
A Harvard study rebuts the notion that there's racial bias when it comes to police shootings. I do agree with you that minorities are targeted when it comes to the use of excessive force. So spending that is a little much here. Here's what happened. The police have an optics problem, and that's what's going on in the campaign trail, and both candidates are using it to their advantage.
There's a lot of optic problems going around. It seems to be a disease, very contagious. Ford and Leslie, good to see you both. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
She's terrible. I mean, she's had a terrible record. Everything she touches is bad. You look at what's going on with Libya, and you look at the surge, and you look at all of her decisions, and you look at the Iran deal, which is one of the dumbest deals I've ever seen, which she started. And she totally backs, by the way. I mean, in its completed form, she totally backs. You look at everything she touched. I mean, it's just a mess.
Well, Donald Trump slamming Hillary Clinton this morning on Fox and Friends, questioning whether she has the judgment to be president. Temperament is something we're going to talk about with our next guest. Among Mr. Trump's many supporters, a very important one, former Indiana basketball coach Bobby Knight campaigned hard for Trump in the primaries, played a big role in helping him win Indiana, thus clinching the Republican nomination. You can see he's our guest. Coach, great to have you on set with us.
It's nice to be here.
Are you responsible for Donald Trump? He helped him clinch in Indiana.
Well, I don't want to say I'm totally responsible for St. Donald, but I'm a big supporter. I like what I see with him. I like what he stands for, and I think he's what we need. So
you've elevated him to St. Donald?
Well, in my mind, I do, just to kind of let him know
that you have some affection for him. Have you always been involved in politics?
No, well, I'll tell you. I was my major in college was history and government, and so I've always had an interest in who we should really appreciate and who we shouldn't appreciate. And my all-time favorite is Harry Truman.
Really?
Yeah.
And why is that?
Well, I think he was just he was tough. And he loved America.
So it's one thing to have an interest and even want to study a topic, but it's another thing to come off the sidelines, if you will, and actually get involved in the process. Why did you feel compelled to do so?
Well, I wasn't. I didn't feel compelled to do so. I'm sure that you're like I am in this. We forget everything. But we love America. That's one thing we don't have a problem with, is the United States of America. I've heard enough about you to know how patriotic.
That's scary.
To know how patriotic and how fair you are. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you.
But when I go back with Donald Trump, I look at everybody, this person, that person, this person, and the thing that comes from basketball, like. You played basketball,
yes.
And I think, as I understand it, you weren't too bad. Now,
well, that's nice of you
I'm
to
not
say.
sure I'd have let you shoot a lot. I'd have made you rebound here and there. But in basketball, we're getting ready to play so-and-so. And we have to figure out how to beat their press. And we have to figure out how to attack their zone. And I think for us to win, we have to be able to find ways to do so. That's where I think he just outweighs everybody.
So you're zeroing in on leadership rather than the actual politics.
No,
so
not just. Well, yeah, you might be right
well,
about that.
let me just ask you this, because you've been able to look at a team of people and lead them to victory. That's something you're known for, and I'm curious why you think Donald Trump can do the same for the country.
Well, I'm glad you asked the question, because he brings with him. See, first of all, Trump is not national; he's international. He's known all over the world. He's put businesses together here and there and elsewhere, and he's provided jobs for all kinds of people, all nationalities, everywhere. And so I say he's an international figure to begin with. Now, in all of these things he's done, and he's had a lot of problems. You know, this didn't go right, that didn't go right, something. But he's been able to correct those problems. He's been able to figure out a way to make this work. And that's what I think, and I've always felt this, that the most important thing in government is a guy that can make things work.
Now, I'm going to put this delicately, but you are known.
Don't worry about delicately with me now, so.
Because you are known for your temperament, certainly on the basketball court, and that's something that Donald Trump is criticized for by Hillary Clinton and others. And I'm curious what you learned over the years about that word, temperament, and what it means and how it can qualify you for a position or disqualify you.
Well, I think temperament is to be studied carefully. I think there's a time when, I'm not sure that temperament is the correct word, but there's a time when you have to speak out. There's a time when you have to say, hey, you know, I've called timeout, and I've got you and my other 4 players there. And I say, we better start guarding somebody or we're going to get our butt beat real quick. And so that's temperament. That's making something plain, and I'm giving you and these other 4 kids here what we have to do to be able to win this game.
So you think temperament's appropriate in certain situations?
Well, I think in some cases. I know my mom used to get mad at me, and it really helped me. I mean, my mother had a temperament beyond most I've ever known.
Well, you came out just fine.
Well,
let me ask you that. This is the most important question of the day. What basketball teams are you thinking are going to go all the way this year?
I have no idea. No, I don't have it. You're not going to trap me on that one. I have no. Let's get back to my man Trump.
Well, St. Donald, as you call him. It's interesting just to hear a little bit about your story, because one of the things we've talked about this year is that people that haven't been traditionally involved in politics are getting more involved because of Donald Trump, and clearly that is the case. So,
well, I followed it carefully. You know, I've had my own idea about this person or that person or whomever, but here I think we are in a situation where it's really important. You know, this is something. Yeah, and in my thinking, he brings with him the tools. Now, I'm
going to have to get cut off by commercial, and I hate to do that to you, but I'm going to have to go. Coach Knight, I know, look at that face. We're going to talk during commercial, though. Don't worry. We'll be right back with more happening now.
I am at your mercy.
Back now with Coach Knight, talking a little bit more about politics.
Before we go further, I want to tell the public I enjoy working with you.
Well, that's right. Now you've totally ruined my street cred on this. No, thank you. I appreciate that. One of the things we were talking about during commercial break is that you've been open to voting for a lot of different people in the past. In fact, you voted for President Obama.
Yes.
But you have a different feeling about who you're voting for this time around. Explain why.
Well, I simply think he is the best prepared person I have studied or been told about for this job right at this time. Obama went into a job that he wasn't prepared for. He didn't have the background that he was really necessary, and I think that's not his fault. That's the fault of the other people that are putting up the guy that's running for the job. But now, with Donald Trump, I'm totally convinced that this is the most prepared person to take over all of the problems that the new president is going to have, because he has been able to take problems and change them with his businesses. He's been able to turn something that doesn't look good into something very profitable, and I think that is the kind of thing that is really going to be impressive, or really going to be important for this next president to be able to do in a large way. And that's why I'm talking about Donald Trump, because I think he's the person.
Coach Knight, it's great to have you in the program. We appreciate it. We look forward to insights in the future about politics and basketball, if I can ever get you to talk about it. So thank you.
I enjoyed it. And next time we'll spend 3 minutes on basketball.
Good. I look forward to that. Greg, we invited a representative from the Hillary Clinton campaign to come on. We welcome them at any time as well, but we thank Coach Knight today.
Fox News Alert: investigators asking for the public's help to learn more about last week's bombing in New York City. They want information on these two guys seen on surveillance video removing a pressure cooker from a piece of luggage and possibly disabling the device. They want to talk to them and examine the bag. In the meantime, the prime suspect, Ahmed Rahami, still hospitalized, unable to communicate after surgery for multiple gunshot wounds. Let's bring in Bill Gavin, former assistant director of the FBI in New York. Bill, always good to talk to you. Rahami was flagged twice in 2014. He was looked at by customs officials, National Targeting Center, even the FBI, and his father told police, that he thought his son might be a terrorist. And yet, the FBI didn't even interview Rahami. How come?
Well, Greg, there's certain things that the FBI can do and can't do. They're bound by guidelines from the Department of Justice in these investigations. You have an initial inquiry, which is what happened in the case of Ahmed Rahami, where they look at him. They check databases of ours. They check databases of intelligence agencies here and overseas. And if they come up with anything, any kind of significant event that might lead to criminal activity, they move to the preliminary inquiry. Each one of these things, though, has boundaries as to how long you can work them and what you can do during the course of those inquiries.
But it must be frustrating. I mean, here's a guy, he immigrates from Afghanistan, then a couple of years ago he goes back to Afghanistan, spends time there, spends 11 months in neighboring Pakistan, he travels to Turkey, he tries to get into Syria. I mean, all of those are red flags, right?
They are, Greg, and it is frustrating on investigators. It's frustrating as can be. The other thing is, he comes back to the United States. He starts to become extremely religious in the Muslim faith. Right. He prays frequently. He grows the beard. But that's nothing that you can address. It's impossible to address that without being politically incorrect, as you
Bill,
well know.
I'm almost out of time, but I have to ask you this question. It's curious to me that if you read the federal complaint against him, the charges, nowhere in there